So I'm sure many of you remember the story of Little Red Riding Hood, which Little Red Riding Hood, well, she went to go visit her grandmother, sweet, innocent person. And on her way to go visit her grandmother, well, there was a big bad wolf kind of on the way there who took a liking to Little Red Riding Hood. And well, as the story goes, the wolf ate the grandmother, sat in the bed, and put on the grandmother's clothes in order to wait for Little Red Riding Hood to come home in order to eat her. Now, why do I tell this story? What's the significance of this? Well, because Jesus gave an illustration in Matthew chapter 7 about false prophets. What did he say? He said, "Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits ye shall know them. Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works? And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. So Jesus here was explaining that false prophets will come to people as wolves in sheep's clothing, just like Little Red Riding Hood. Unsuspecting Little Red Riding Hood was like, well, I'm going to go visit my grandmother today. And on her way there, obviously, she is met by this stranger, somebody that she did not know, but somehow he was able to convince her, hey, I'm an innocent little grandmother here. And I think the story goes that, yeah, he ends up trying to eat Little Red Riding Hood. I think he ends up eating her, to be honest. So that's the end of that story. That kind of sucks. Pretty grim, if you ask me. Um, but yeah, so other stories in history have been like Chicken Little, which is a bit similar, not quite the same story, but uh, in this particular story, well, it was a fox. And there's an old saying, don't put the fox over the hen house. And the reason for that is because, well, foxes like hens. They want to eat them. So it's always good to like not have the fox in charge, okay? But in this story of Chicken Little, what the fox does is he goes and he finds somebody that's stupid. He's like, ooh, who can I find that's nice and stupid? And he found Chicken Little. And well, what he did was he deceived Chicken Little to think that he was somebody important, and then later went and made him trick the other chickens that, hey, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And of course, the leader of the chickens was like, hang on a second, let's inspect the evidence here. He's like, oh, look, the piece of wood fell and hit my head. The sky is falling. He's like, man, that piece of wood. It's just the sky's not falling. And then he just dismisses it. Well, the chickens later go on to take the side of Chicken Little. And well, what happens next? He says, hey, let's run to the forest and take cover. And so they run to the cave, and guess what happens? Well, the chickens get eaten by the fox. So the lesson here is beware of false prophets, because what they want to do is they want to kill. they want to eat the people. They want to eat the chickens, right? So another illustration that's happened in history, and this is not a false story, this is actually a true story, is the Jonestown Massacre. Jim Jones was a perfect example of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Just like Jesus said, beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing. Okay. Well, now, what ended up happening with the Jonestown Massacre was that Jim Jones actually tricked all of these people to follow his cult. And well, they ended up creating a town out, I think it was in South America, and it was called Jonestown. And what ended up happening was he was leading these people in a very abusive and controlling sort of cult that ended in the death of hundreds of people. And it could have been prevented had the people been a bit more suspicious of his doings, like, hey, I don't think this is very biblical. He went so far as to even sleep with his congregation. He had not just heterosexual intercourse with his congregation, but he was also a homosexual as well. So he was sleeping both with men and women. It was quite disgusting. And so what's interesting is that he was, obviously Caucasian, but his congregation was predominantly African American, and very strange, very very strange. So it's a sad, sad story, but yeah, it's an example of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Somebody that comes along and they convince the people that, hey, you can trust me, it's okay. But signs are going to show and reveal that, you know what, this person is not as interesting or cool as the rest of us. So anyways, that is what a wolf in sheep's clothing is. And if you read in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus references the subject of their fruits. Notice he said, hey, you're going to know them by their fruits in Matthew chapter 7. He's like, you're going to know that these are false prophets by the fruits that they show. And so in Matthew chapter 7, you're thinking, well, what does that mean? What does that mean by their fruits? Well, Jesus talks about it again in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 33, in which he says the same exact thing. He says, either make the tree good and his fruit good, or else make the tree corrupt and his fruit corrupt. For the tree is known by his fruit. O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. A good man out of the good treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. So, a perfect example of Old Testament false prophets, wolves in sheep's clothing, was, you guessed it, the scribes and Pharisees. Who were the scribes and Pharisees? Well, they were religious leaders of the predominantly Jewish religion back in the day. And unfortunately, they were the ones that ended up crucifying Jesus Christ. They were spiritual leaders. They were the fundamentalists of their day. And they were the ones that put Jesus Christ to death. And, well, they never knew God to begin with. Although they were very accustomed to the scriptures and to the Bible, they knew the Bible very well. They did not have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ or with God. And so thus became history that they were the ones that put the Son of God to death. The very religious leaders that God had put in place in order to teach the people, they ended up turning on him. They ended up becoming the very vile stench that they were supposed to fight against. It's very sad, very, very sad. They did not do their job. They were false prophets. And yes, they were wolves in sheep's clothing, just like Little Red Riding Hood's wolf. So let that be a lesson to you guys. If you come across a wolf in sheep's clothing, make sure that you pay attention to the signs and that you run as fast as you can. Thanks for listening. I am Brian Price.